All right, so now let's unpack what the president has unveiled today in terms of his cabinet. He has, of course, created some new positions, the prime cabinet secretary, cabinet level advisory roles, and also looking at the mix of cabinet. My guests are here, Professor Marion Mutugi from the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, from the University of Nairobi, Senior Lecturer Dr. Godwin Siundu, and Siasa Place Executive Director Nerima Wako-Ojiwa. Let's actually begin with that quick one. Two police bosses have handed in their resignations, and the president has already nominated somebody to take over that role. Now, this handing over of resignation by the two bosses, what do you make of it, Prof? Do you think it's really because they felt that, you know, with the new change of guard, let's hand over to somebody else? Or do you think they had a conversation that led to their resignations?
The Constitution talks about meritocracy. And yet we also want to acknowledge that a person must work with people who they are in sync, where they have chemistry, who will be able to help them achieve their agenda. I think the president has been very, very clear that he has a passion for the vulnerable in society, the hustler, the mamamboga, the boda. And his socio-economic rights agenda, he must look for people who he believes will help him achieve it. However, it's a question of balancing. Are we sacrificing, did the president sacrifice meritocracy at the altar of loyalty? Because we have seen the president is very loyal. He has given his supporters the posts that he believes that they deserve. But the question is, do they actually deserve them from their experience and from their expertise? And so if the two gentlemen, Mutiambai and Kinoti, will not help him achieve his agenda for socio-economic rights for the vulnerable, the boda, the mamamboga, then he must look for people who will be in sync.
You know, Doc, it can't really escape anyone who looks back at the president's inauguration at Kasarani 2 weeks ago, what the deputy president said, that, you know, we have come out of a period of serious persecution in the name of fighting crime and pursuit of justice. And this was injustice being perpetrated and meted out on people who were of a certain political persuasion. And then we see the Inspector General of Police resigning, the DCI boss resigning. Do you expect to see, for example, EACC and the DPP also following the same route? Because if you just look at what the deputy president has said previously and what we are starting to see now, is it a beginning of a purge?
Believe it or not, it is a purge. It should not be lost on anyone that David, Hilary Mutyambai and Kinoti were professionals in charge of law and order at the point of enforcement and at the point of investigation. And the biggest irony in all this is that, contrary to what the deputy president said at Kasarani, the decisions to induce these resignations, because these are not natural resignations, the decision to induce these resignations is the beginning of politicization of these institutions, which actually takes us back to where we have always wanted to move away from. And to understand this even more, you need to place it in context. And the context being that the president has made no bones about his suspicion about the professionalism of Kinoti, the professionalism of Mutyambai, and so on. Both gentlemen, in the president's understanding, are the most incompetent folks to ever hold those two offices. But as to whether that is actually the truth or not is a matter of, perception, is a matter of subjective opinions and so on. What I know is that even as he embarks on bringing together an entire team that will enable him achieve his hustler vision for the country, many heads will roll literally, many heads will roll metaphorically, and we are going to see the kind of abuse and misuse of other institutions to get even, because in the name of law and order, a lot of political grudges can be settled. In fact, when you look at the political history of this country, as far as it involves the political elite, it's nothing but the maneuver of law and politics to either evade justice or exact revenge and so on. So if we take away the legalities of somebody wanting to work with people with whom he has a working chemistry, the message that goes across to the rest of the public is that if I have a different opinion about what constitutes professionalism, then I am meant to appear as if I'm incompetent, I am inadequate, I am unsuitable to hold public office. And that, in my view, is a very wrong message that we are sending out there.
But how do you balance this, even as we come to you, Nerima? How do you balance the Constitution as we promulgated it in 2010 and the laws thereafter envisaged a police service that was completely independent, that was being managed by the Police Service Commission? And then, of course, we saw the introduction of the Security Laws Amendments, which brought in some sort of control to the executive. Now, if you think about it, you're going around the country campaigning to be the president. Of course, people expect that you're going to be the one who is in charge of their safety and security. And then you go and you become you really cannot control the people who are mandated with enforcement of safety and security. How do you balance those two? A president who looks at who is the best person to serve this docket, who would take my command, whose advice I would listen to and trust, and this whole thing that we're talking about with Prof of meritocracy and all those things. How do you balance that?
I think that we are living in a time where we haven't reviewed our constitution, and the fact that when it was written, the vision was Kenya was in an idealist position where people who decided or wanted to run or lead this country were doing it for servitude and to serve the public. But we've seen that even though the Constitution does cover integrity or leadership in Chapter 6, so we see public finance management, there's complete mismanagement in the counties, and we can continuously even talk about integrity within this cabinet. And the fact that there are a number of individuals who have pending cases, but they are still able to be appointed into positions of power. I think that the president is in a position where his leadership is being tested, because leadership is not about control. It's being able to have dissenting voices within your team so that you are able to listen and measure what's the best option or alternative to take. Where the country is right now, it would be healthy to have dissenting voices within your team, because you want to be able to have and make decisions based on compromise. So decisions where you're able to see from both ends and be able to come into a conclusion where you know that both angles are individuals who have expertise, and you're able to say, this is the solution that I feel is best for the country. And where it becomes unhealthy is when you begin to lead a team where no one can negate what you say, because now you're focusing on loyalty. And so as much as if we view the country like an airplane and the president is our pilot and there's a co-captain who in this case it's the deputy president, the deputy president cannot say, okay, things are not looking okay in the cockpit, and we cannot rely on the stewardesses who are our cabinet right now, and we are the passengers on this flight. We are basically being flown to a direction that we might not agree with, but we have no control over, because he is the captain, and there's no one who is going to be able to support him or assist him in terms of guidance.
Nerima, are you saying that looking at the lists that has been unveiled today, you don't feel that any of them is independent-minded?
Yes,
is opinionated, can actually stand up and say something that goes contrary to what the room is saying?
I believe that the way the cabinet has been structured, it's going to be very difficult for individuals to be independent.
What makes you say so? What makes you think so?
Because of the way they have entered those positions. You can clearly see that there are individuals who are linked to political parties, not just UDA, we've also seen ANC as well. So you can see that there's a sense of, yes, measuring whether someone has a background to be able to work within that space, but there's also a very strong inclination to political alignment, tokenism, and the fact that we've also seen that it's going to be difficult for them to stand on their own because they are representing a quarter, and that's why they are there.
So you see just yes men and women. Spineless yes men and women.
I'm not saying that they are spineless. I'm saying that they have an opportunity to have a spine, but I don't think they are going to be able to. I don't think they are going to. I think a lot of them are going to be afraid to. And I think we're also in an interesting period because we saw public officials, you know, campaigning so much in the Kenyatta administration, and we wondered what's going to happen if his team didn't win, and that's exactly what happened. People didn't have answers for that, and we all know that it is awkward what we just witnessed today with the cabinet secretaries who are leaving. Very awkward, and some of them still trying to show that they are interested in continuing in service, some of them hoping to be seen in service, even sharing in public statements, but they weren't. Only two, and the silent two, who probably lobbied behind the scenes, and we didn't see them publicly making statements. So I do think that it's going to be hard for them to do so. So we just need to buckle up and hope that we have a president who will be able to make the right decisions 100% of the time. And we all know that that is false. And so I would encourage that the next appointments would be people from different spaces for him to be able to make better decisions.
Prof, do you agree with what Nerima is saying?
You know, it is interesting because is there anybody in this cabinet who, from what we know, can be able to say that the emperor is naked? I'm not sure I can see any. But having looked at it from independence to date, we have had 4 distinct transitions, all based on human rights. The independence administration of Kenyatta was about the right to land.
Yeah.
And as soon as he got in, he started sorting it out to deliver so that people can see we get. Forget the transition from Kenyatta to Moi because it was a continuity. The second transition was from Moi to Kibaki. It was a watershed moment for us because it was about civic and political rights.
Yeah.
It was on the backdrop of the one-party state where there was a totalitarian administration, where we were afraid to talk, where we queued instead of secret ballot. And therefore, as Kibaki came in, it was civic and political rights, and there was so much hope in the country. And we saw that people are all charged that we have finally gotten it. We come to the third transition between Kibaki and Uhuru. Very interesting, because it wasn't about us. It was about them. It was the right to fair hearing. We said, look here, these are 2 of our sons, and it looks like they want to be imprisoned unfairly. We're going to rally behind them. We were told that choices have consequences. We said we want to see them, and we voted them in. As soon as we voted them in, there was nothing for us. They had a blank check. They could do what they wanted to do. We had done our part. We have saved our sons. Now we come to the 4th transition on socio-economic rights. Here, this election was in the backdrop of a serious pandemic which exposed our fragile health system. It was on the backdrop of a big issue of economic hardships where people were not able to put food on the table. It was on the backdrop of a big security issue that emanated from all this. And the people who were vulnerable were the mamamboga, the hustlers, and the boda. And here is somebody who came and said, look here, vote us in. We understand your story. We're going to give you this right. The question I want to ask, from what has happened, and they really gave us their promises for 100 days. I don't know how many days have gone, but that said this is 2 weeks, so 14 days, so we have another, call them 80-something days, 86 days. Are these socio-economic rights? The cabinet that has been chosen, does it elicit trust that they will be able to deliver these socio-economic rights? Now, the story of Mutiambai and Kinoti how is it aligned to the person who goes out and gets his daily kibarua and comes home and is not able to feed his family and is not able to meet their needs? The issue on the table is unga, livelihoods. So if this new administration loses sight of the agenda of socio-economic rights and goes on like we saw today to that totalitarianism, you did this one, and loyalty, then they may be sacrificing merit at the altar of loyalty, professionalism sacrificed at the altar of loyalty. Look at it this way. Those people who woke up and went and voted, hustlers, who of these people elicits, oh, this is one of us? Who is it? There's none.
Maybe. Actually, let's look at the list. The people that you're saying are being rewarded for their political loyalty, they represent that. Because they're the people who went and convinced the voter to vote for William Ruto. So the voter connected with some of these politicians. If you look at Kipchumba Murkomen, having worked with William Ruto all these years, he is one of the people who was going with William Ruto to the ground to campaign. Alice Wahome doing the same. If you look at ANC leader Musalia Mudavadi doing the same. These are the people who went to promise. And when the people were voting for William Ruto, they were voting for William Ruto knowing that among his soldiers are these people. We trust Dende Njoro, we trust Alice Wahome, we trust Aden Duale, we trust Alfred Mutua, we trust, so we are also voting for William Ruto.
And yet, that is...
So when they see that,
yes,
maybe they're seeing the face of the hustler.
True. And yet, the president came out very clearly and said, these people stood by me. They were actually persecuted because of association with me. So he's rewarding loyalty. The question on the table, these people are agents who went and sought the vote of the hustler. But is any of them, is there any one of these people who they can say, okay, this is a hustler like I am? Or are we dealing with agents? Is it the same old people? None of them. And then there is the issue of what is the most important thing at this point? It is the price of unga. And that's why we voted. We said, look here, we can't put food on the table. Our livelihoods are threatened. What does all this have to do with unga? The socio-economic rights, those people who are not able to get help.
How different would it have been? I mean, and any of you can come in. How different would it have been so that you can feel that the issue of unga is addressed? I'm looking at this cabinet and I'm seeing Moses Kuria taking over trade and industry. And this is the Nyamakema person, the small traders, everybody who Moses Kuria was talking about and advocating for. He's been given the job. He's going to deliver. I'm being the devil's advocate here, but also completely going all out. And in some cases, there's some truth to what I'm saying.
In my opinion, Latif, to answer that question, a helpful starting point is to ask ourselves, what is President Ruto trying to achieve by coming up with these cabinets as it's currently constituted? And in my opinion, the president has not gotten over the scare of winning these presidents by a very small margin. And so what he's trying to do is to build new alliances and make his attempt at re-election much easier. And that explains, in my opinion, why he has tried to be more generous to areas that are traditionally associated with the only serious political presidential contenders, that is the Coast region and Eastern, Kalonzo Musyoka staff. And this ties in with what Professor is saying with regard to rewarding loyalty. My own opinion is that this loyalty is not the overriding consideration, because, for instance, if I were to name Honorable Alfred Mutua as Foreign Affairs Minister, it is very difficult for you to convince me that Mutua worked harder for Ruto than, say, Cleophas Malala in Kakamega or even Dindi Nyoro in Muranga. So even if we are to use a scale that measures loyalty, Mutua still scores poorly compared to Malala in Kakamega or Nyoro. Or even within the digital spaces, people like Eric Ngeno, they did much, much more to sell the hustler narrative to the voter compared to some of these ladies and gentlemen who've been appointed here. So I think it is fair to conclude that the president is now on full throttle, disdaining every other institution that appear to stand in his way, and then mobilizing new alliances that will use then to make his re-election smoother. And that is how, for him now, the question of UNGA has become academic.
So you're saying the president has launched his re-election bid today?
Yes. Take it to the bank.
Really?
Some of these people are hired guns. If you look at the reality that somebody like Eden Duale, with his mobilizational skills, with his penchant to shoot from the hip, when you look at somebody like Moses Kuria, in my opinion, the nomination of Moses Kuria for the cabinet secretary's position was just to communicate a point to the former president that, look, I can eject you and get somebody from within your backyard to do my bidding. When you look at people like Eliud Owalo, people like Ababu Namwamba, people like Davis Chirchir, fairly good guys if you ask me, but also very adept at executing political mandates. So, in my opinion, the president has decided to fix his eyes on 2027 and assume that in the meantime, he'll manage to drag along the country. So I agree with what my colleagues are saying, that the president considers loyalty, but I'm also saying that loyalty is not his primary consideration at this point. And that is how you find the examples I've given left out, and including people who, in my opinion, are opportunists, for lack of a better word. Owalo, Mutua. These are Johnny come-latelys to the Kenya Kwanza.
Owalo has been there actually for much longer. You know,
and yet
he is among those who was forming the strategy for
he has a
Ruto's
history.
campaign.
For historical records,
Yes.
Owalo worked for the ODM secretariat for the longest time.
Yeah.
And I think his personal gripe with either the ODM leader or some members in the ODM secretariat, that's what pushed him to go to the other side. As recently as last year, the cabinet nominee for foreign and diaspora affairs was hosting a birthday party to which he invited the Azimio leader Raila Odinga. And he only, crossed the floor when he realized that perhaps his slot within the Azimio configuration was not assured. So I guess what I'm saying is that even before we decide to say the president considered this or that, we may need to conduct a moral audit on these characters themselves and see what are we left with.
And yet, right now, we ought to ask ourselves, what is the biggest challenge that this government has, or as Kenyans? 20 counties are facing severe drought.
Yep.
As we are talking now, we have a big issue with the educational system. As we are talking now, we have a big issue with health. And yet, these are not the issues that are being seen to be dealt with. I have an issue with meritocracy, because look at the education sector. It's in shambles. CBC and so forth. And they did actually promise something for CBC. Now, if you really want to fix, we've seen the outgoing cabinet secretary for education up and about. It's a big challenge. I would imagine that he would have picked somebody like Professor Kithure Kindiki, who is a well-known and seasoned academician. Universities right now, as we are talking, have a problem with their very existence. Many of them are insolvent. Now, it would be hard for you to tell me how Machogu, who has been a public administrator all his life, how he can be able to grasp and sort out the educational challenge. Look at the drought situation we have and marginalization of the people in the arid and semi-arid counties. Who would be a better person than Aden Duale, who has a lived experience of ASAL? How much does Miano, for example, What's her experience and expertise on arid and semi-arid countries? Look at energy. We have a big problem with energy. And they did promise that our petrol bills will come down. Of course, Chirchir has been in that ministry before. But who has the expertise and experience other than Rebecca Miano, who has been in that industry for all this long? So I have a problem with matching expertise and loyalty. I am not, in his wisdom, he's put them this way, but I find it very hard to understand meritocracy.
Can I talk about something on the arrangement? I think for me what bothered me a bit is the fact that youth was clumped with arts and sports. And youth is normally just shifted like a toy.
It's one of those additions.
And it's a big matter. And I say this because when you have information communications put up with digital economy, I was happy to see that, because a lot of young people right now are transitioning into technological spaces to be able to make a living for themselves.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a very important department. And my concern with the youth right now, which I think if this is, as Dr. is saying, his bid for 2027, he should be concerned about the population that put him in. And I say this because we're talking about 22 million who could vote. And out of that number, 8 million chose not to. And a number of them are young people. So the president has come into power with a vote of 7 million and something. 8 million actually didn't come out. 8 million actually didn't select. 8 million actually said, I want to be removed from this. And when you look at 5 years from now, we're going to have another maybe 5 million, right? Who are going to be eligible to vote. Are you encouraging them or even providing opportunities to entice them to want to keep you there? Or are you going to be a president who is voted in by a minority? And the fact that youth has been put with sports and art, I'm hoping that we do not lose focus, because youth should have its own ministry, because there's a lot of issues with this majority population that is now mainstreamed, from education to what you're talking about, to opportunities on energy, or even the fact that we're transitioning to the environment, to tourism and how it's changed because of travel, to people in semi-arid rural areas. We're talking about lack of access to resources. And so it's across the board, because the people we're talking about who are having access with these issues are majority young people. And even when we talk about health, it's young mothers with toddlers below the age of 5 who are mainly in our clinics, in maternity, who don't have access to healthcare or NHIF. So for me, I think that when I saw that they lost
to be
focus,
a standalone ministry.
It doesn't have to be, but it needs to be taken more seriously. It should.
It sounds to me like it's a main ministry.
It
youth,
should be.
Youth affairs, sports, and arts.
Yes.
In fact, if you ask me, maybe it's arts that just is a token into this, just to drive along the youth agenda. But youth sounds to be the ministry here, isn't it?
Yes, it should be taken seriously that way, but it is not. And a lot of
it
youth
is,
also...
Nerima.
No, it's not.
It's the Ministry of Youth Affairs, Sports and Gender.
It is not. What happened? Let me just explain
Not
to
like
you.
the other way around, where we had ICT, innovation,
when youth was
and
under
youth.
ICT. When youth was under ICT, first of all, the CS heavily focused on ICT. And that's what normally happens. When youth was under public service and gender, there was a lot of focus on gender, a lot of focus on public service. Youth always comes later and last. And what I'm trying to highlight right now is the fact that if we do not take care of the youth problem, because right now it's a challenge, and if we don't pay attention to the challenge, it will quickly transition into a problem. And what happens with Africa, an unstable continent, and our countries, is the fact that when you have a very large population that doesn't have access to opportunity and livelihoods, you are going to find it very hard to manage. And if we do not focus on how are we going to manage this majority population, they should be the focus of government right now, then no one will be able to talk about anything, because there won't be any peace in this country. It's going to be very easy to tip over and all those other departments we're discussing here will be irrelevant if we do not have a stable majority population.
To some extent, I hear what you're saying. When you say Ministry of Youth Affairs, Sports and Arts, it's basically like condemning. Youth should be involved in sports and arts. You know?
Just leave them there in that corner and let them go and play. And
if you see
energy.
people playing football, that's youth.
That's
it's fine.
youth.
We have sorted them out.
Yes.
I think the point that Nerima is alluding to, but which perhaps she'll allow me to, reiterate, is the fact that, by and large, this is a cabinet of middle-aged characters, and history shows us that for as long as the youthful demography is not reflected in the cabinet, it is business as usual. So it doesn't matter that much that the word youth precedes all others in this ministry. What matters is that when the chips are down, chances are that Babu Namwamba will focus on these other elements
sports.
or components of the ministry, and that is a big problem. And it ties in with what I was saying earlier. In the president's wisdom in selecting whom to nominate for the positions of CS, you will notice that even his ardent supporters, provided they were youth, were not considered. Both in terms of the nomination, but also in terms of assigning responsibilities within the cabinet. I don't know how these things work, but if you were to ask me who between Justin Muturi and Kindiki Kithure should be AG, I'm likely to go with Kithure Kindiki. Because everybody has a sense of Muturi's history. His contacts and clashes with the law.
Speaker of the National Assembly.
Yes, but there
in
was something,
charge of the lawmaking body
there
in the
was
country.
something beyond
As
that.
Attorney General.
There was something beyond that.
Yes.
Which you know very well, and which everybody, I guess, knows. But it is not within my remit to make such decisions. What I'm saying is that I want to agree with Nerima that we should not be fooled by the beautiful words that are used to designate these ministries. The fact of the matter is that the president has chosen to walk the well-trodden path of patriarchy, of getting good old men to oversee the business in government. And that is how people like Ndindi Nyoro, surely, they could have been offered something.
I thought you don't want to see politicians in this. Can you make up your mind? What do you want?
You see, when all is said and done, Latif, we are talking about the situation as is. And the situation as is that the president has cannibalized, parliament to get Kipchumba Murkomen, to get Alice Wahome, to get Aden Duale. Why couldn't he then go the whole 9 yards and get in Ndindi Nyoro, who did much more, in my opinion, than 70% of the characters that we have on this list? But as Nerima says, there must be something behind the story. And that is something that we should seek to understand as a people.
We should question.
If you look at the second transition, where Moi was here for many years, 24 years, what brought Moi down? Because that second transition was the most definitive transition we've had in this country. It is that Moi had offended. The Moi administration had trampled on the rights, different rights of so many people and so many groups, that there was a tipping point that they regrouped and they voted him out. This is a real danger that this new administration must keep focused on, because their win was not even as definitive as Kibaki's win. And it can easily tip if their demographic group of supporters are disillusioned. Look at the challenges we have today of insecurity in this country. Just the other day, policemen have been killed. By the way, policemen are human beings and are Kenyans, and they have rights. So we should not be sending them there so we have actually insecurity in the North Rift. Who understands security in the North Rift other than Mukomen? He should be the one doing that. So I have a problem with how it was chosen and loyalty. And the truth of the matter is, unless they can focus on the socio-economic rights in which platform they were voted in, all the other things they will do will not add up.
Okay, as we conclude, what the president has done today is merely nominate the ladies and gentlemen. The work then goes to Parliament for vetting. And if the Parliament approves, then he appoints. Now, is there any reason why the National Assembly could reject any of the people who've been nominated today? Any reason at all that you can foresee?
There are many reasons, but if we go by history, we know that Parliament votes using a very different criteria than the one that we are thinking about. We have seen that they have this issue, who has the majority, who doesn't have the majority. We have seen this administration trying to get the independents on their side just to get that majority. So the rationale they have for confirming or not confirming these people is not necessarily competence or integrity. It is something else that I may not understand, but it is shrouded in a bit of mystery.
Would there be issues of competence and integrity that would crop up in the parliamentary sittings and vetting process?
I don't think
that
so.
That would then lead to a...
I would want to believe that it would happen, but I need to be persuaded. I don't see any person doing that. But playing devil's advocate, he still has PSS to nominate. He seems to want to have CAS, the CASs, although he was negative about them before, but he seems to want to bring them in because he has realized he has so many people to reward and very few positions to do that. So let's give him a chance and pray that these things we are talking about here, we pray that they are the back of his, and that he will nominate the youth in CSs, CASs and PSs and complement and match merit, professionalism, expertise, experience to the various positions. I want to play devil's advocate on that one. But for this one, I have a problem.
I think to answer your question, I should say that, in the period after the declaration of his presidency, his swearing in, and the announcement of the cabinet today, the proposed cabinet, Parliament has already been taken care of through the horse trading that we saw during the elections of the respective speakers of the National Assembly and of Senate, and nominations to various committees in the House. I think that has been taken care of. It is very unlikely that any of these nominees will be rejected by the vetting committees in Parliament. For that reason, but also for the reason that many of these are friends. These guys have been working together, dragging each other in the mud and then sharing a drink later in the evening. And so it is an opportunity for them to close ranks and cut more deals. So it is quite unlikely that any of these people will be rejected by Parliament at the vetting stage.
So fait accompli, just a rubber stamping exercise?
Fait accompli is the phrase. It's done and dusted.
You feel so?
I feel so.
Let me remind you that the process here is when the names go to the National Assembly then will form the committee and they'll invite any views from any member of the public who has an issue against any of these nominees to come and present them before the committee. So you have an opportunity, if you have an issue, to present it before the committee, and it will be on record, public record.
I think some civil society organizations are going to actually step up on some of their names there, just because of some of the cases that they've been involved in. Even if nothing happens to them at the moment, I think it's a case of precedence. And the fact that we do these things so that for future purposes, future generations can be able to utilize these avenues that are accessible. So I believe that they're going to serve their term. I believe there are going to be rejections within the public, and there are people who are going to object. But whether that objection is going to be listened to, that's another case, probably not. But I think it's healthy that we are given that opportunity to do this as citizens in this country, and that opportunity shouldn't go.
All right, so I just wanted to do a round of closing remarks. You've seen the nominations. Basically, the president is signaling what he'd like to do with his government. The last 14 days, he came in and said, I'd like to do 1, 2, 3, 4 immediately. Appointment of the judges, gazetted them. He said, I want to see the police service having its own autonomy in terms of controlling its funds. Has already actioned on that. He has talked about, we cannot sustain this kind of subsidies on fuel. He's taken action on that. Fertilizer is already being rolled out. They've started talking about the people who are facing hunger across the country. So the president has basically taken steps and is moving, and has even nominated his cabinet. As your closing remarks, what do you see? Do you see the president achieving what he had promised he would do within the first 100 days? Or do you see him failing to achieve it? I'll start with you, Nerima.
I see him maybe not achieving all. It's going to be difficult too. A number of the things he had promised, including 50%, and we've seen it's not 50%. But then there's still the women rights charter that he has placed Harriet Chigai, which congratulations to her as advisor. Personally know her and wish her the best in that. So I believe that there are going to be individuals who are going to try and meet expectations, but it will not be 100%. So not failure completely, I don't believe, but I hope that it will be more than 50%.
Okay. Dr. Ari?
Yes. I agree with Nerima that it's going to be impossible for the president to achieve his objectives within the first 100 days, for the simple reason that the cabinet that the president has nominated today will cause greater disappointment within the Kenya Kwanza ranks than even in the opposition. And what that means is that people are going to engage in a lot of cloak and dagger wars to try and, scramble for crumbs or whatever it is. And those who've been nominated to try and secure their territories and things like those. And in the process, of course, service delivery will suffer. But again, I also know that given the repeated mantra that the country is literally broke, how is he going to achieve whatever he wants to achieve without anything in the exchequer? So until they work to generate revenue through tax collection or whatever means, there'll be nothing really much with which to do the things that the president promised to do. And then, of course, deriving from all this, he'll have to appease his wounded lieutenants, many of whom will rightly or wrongly think that they deserved better inclusion or better treatment at the point of cabinet nominations.
All right. Prof.
Our biggest impediment in this country in terms of achieving our needs, socio-economic needs, our food, health, and so on, is corruption. And until this government or any other government that will come is able to deal with this matter head on, and we see real heads roll, all the things that we are doing will be naught. And so all those things he has done is good. But I think our saving grace will be the judiciary. If the judiciary is able to be up to it and have heads roll in terms of corruption cases taken all the way to the end. We know some of these people were cleared to run with ongoing cases because of certain provisions that they have not exhausted or rooms of appeal. So those should be taken to the very end. And that can only happen with judiciary. And the judiciary will need to pull up its socks in terms of delayed justice, because you can have these cases running until 5 years are over. Then you have no effect. So if the judiciary can have this access to justice system in place so that these cases are determined on time, then this will elicit the confidence and the trust, because public confidence and trust is quickly eroded, very, very quickly eroded. They came in with the hustlers and they put them in, and all the hopes are up there with trust, but that trust can be lost in a very short time. Inside a year, you can lose all that trust. So until and unless they deal with corruption, and it is seen to be corruption that is blind to the status of a person, is not a few hustlers who are taken to court, but real big fish. We were told that they would bring big fish in some other administration. Unless they are able to deal with that, we can take it to the bank that they will not be able to achieve the mandate of the hustler nation. And with that, 2027, those same people who voted them in will vote them out.
Gentlemen and ladies, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And thank you, of course, for sharing your thoughts on what you've seen so far with the William Ruto administration. And thank you as well for watching. This is Newsline on KTN News. We've been having a conversation with Professor Marion Mutugi from the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, Dr. Godwin Siundu, a senior lecturer at the University of Nairobi, and Nerima Wako Jiwa, who is the Executive Director of Siasa Place. We've been looking at the William Ruto administration. Now, please don't forget, people, today, those are very big milestones in our democracy. That a president comes and publicly nominates people to join his cabinet, and then lets that happen then lets the next steps go to the formal process, parliament, vetting, and then he will appoint. Those are big steps. All of us, of course, are in this country, and we'd like to see a government succeed. So it's all within our mandate to make sure that we play our part as well in checking the government to make sure that it delivers on the promises so that all of us can succeed. My name is Eric Latif. Do have a good evening.